John 7:18. Qui assemet ipso loquitur, gloriam propriam quaerit. Qui autem quaerit gloria eius, qui misit illum, hic verax est, et injustitia in illo non est. He who speaks on his own account, or by his own authority, seeks or aims at his own glory. But he who seeks the glory of him who sent him, this man is truthful, and there is not any wrongdoing in him. Well, in contrast to our previous verse, the syntax of this verse is relatively easy to understand, so we will direct our attention to a couple matters of vocabulary. First thing we want to recognize about the structure of this verse is its composition out of two relative clauses. And in between here, if we were going to punctuate this in an English kind of way, we'd probably put a semicolon to relate these two thoughts because they are related more explicitly. Qui assemet ipso loquitur, you can put a comma here, he who speaks from himself, literally, but of his own accord, on his own account, by his own authority, something like that. The main thing to recognize here is simply that met intensifies or strengthens the sense of se. So se here is our ordinary reflexive pronoun that we've seen so many times before. Semet is just a more emphatic way of saying se. It's kind of untranslatable in terms of its emphasis, but both of these are ablatives following the preposition a or ab. He who speaks in this way, that is, in his own authority, on his own account. He, quaerit, he is seeking or aiming at his own glory. Now, glory here, in order to build our copia verborum, in order to build up our understanding of Latin vocabulary and be able to express ourselves in writing and in speech in Latin with more facility and ease, we can stop and ask ourselves, how else might one say gloria in Latin? There are a few other options. None of these words exactly corresponds to the sense and usage of gloria, but all of them are near synonyms. That is, they overlap substantially and they mean roughly the same thing. So we could mention claritas, which is a feminine noun of the third declension. Claritas, claritatis in the genitive singular. We could mention honor. Sometimes, especially in Cicero, it ends with an S. Instead, we see honos, but in either case is a masculine noun and the genitive singular is honoris. And we also might say laus, which is a feminine noun of the third declension, laus laudis. All of these are good synonyms for gloria, and doing this kind of exercise, compelling ourselves to say, well, hey, if I wanted to say this another way and mean more or less the same thing, how would I do it? That's a good practice to build up our Latin vocabulary and to understand which words mean the same thing, which words mean similar but slightly different things, which words are opposites, etc. That's a good kind of exercise to put our minds through as we think through Latin. Similarly, for quaerit, used twice in this verse, we might posit the similar verb petere. And this is a third conjugation verb. Petere means to seek or to aim at something, among other things. There's some other things that it can mean in context. But here, we could just as easily say petit as quaerit. So that gives us a moment to reflect on different ways of indicating that idea in Latin. We also want to note here that autem, though it is not always this way, genuinely has an adversative sense here. But there's a contrast, right? We've got our first relative clause and then our second one. He who does this seeks his own glory, the glory that, strictly speaking, belongs to him. But he who seeks the glory not of himself, but of him, eius, another person, namely in this case, God the Father, he who seeks the glory of him, who, and then we've actually got another relative clause within that relative clause, he who seeks the glory of him who sent, third person singular, perfect active indicative, who sent him, that person, that is, the one who we initially denoted by using qui. This person is truthful, verax. And here we could just as easily have said verus, which would mean more or less the same thing. He's truthful. He speaks things that are not false. And there is no injustitia in him. Injustitia, you can see here the prefix in negates justitia. Justitia means the ideal state of affairs in which each person receives what he deserves. Justice, of course, our English word justice comes from justitia. So injustitia, we could say, is something like wrongdoing. It corresponds in the original Greek to adikia, which means doing wrong. Now, some English translations say this person is truthful and there is no falsehood in him, which is a bit of an extrapolation from the context saying, well, what particular type of wrongdoing are we talking about if we're emphasizing somebody's truthfulness? Well, the opposite of that truthfulness or wrongdoing in that context would be not speaking the truth. That is, speaking lies or being deceptive. But we'll stick with a literal translation for our purposes here and just say wrongdoing. There is none of that in him.